crucial question, Beth. Did he jump before he was pushed?
Well, I would phrase it as he was given the opportunity to resign on his own terms before he was forced out. But I think the writing was on the wall because 2 complaints were upheld. And the Deputy Prime Minister himself had said if any complaint was upheld, he would resign. And it's pretty clear that since 2 were out of the 8, that if he didn't fall on his own sword, in the end, the Prime Minister would have had to wield the knife and get rid of him. So the way in which this was done, in a way, was as beneficial to Mr Raab as possible because the sequencing was he got his version of events out first, being highly critical of the process, saying that complaints hadn't been dealt with in the right way and the threshold for bullying in the view of Mr Raab was very low. And then we saw the Tully report as to what the accusations were or what the findings were and the Prime Minister's very sympathetic letter to him. So in a way, yes, he would have had to go either way, but the Prime Minister did it in a way that was as beneficial to his former deputy as possible.
Because that's the question that Rishi Sunak's going to get asked. Would he have sacked Dominic Raab, isn't it?
Yeah, it is the question that would have been asked. I think in the letter there's an implication that he would have, because he talks about, as I said in that report, a government of integrity, professionalism and accountability. Look, I think there's a couple of arguments in this, Mark. The PM's backers would say he is clearing out the top table when necessary. 2 resignations, 1 sacking. Someone pointed out to me earlier today that that was very different than how Boris Johnson behaved when the former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, was to have found to have potentially breached the ministerial code. He stood behind her, whereas what you see from Rishi Sunak is a different approach. But others would argue, why were these people in his cabinet in the first place? If he knew, as I've been told, that there were concerns around Dominic Raab's conduct before he put him into cabinet and made him his deputy, why did he do that? You know, so there's questions about, you promise a government of integrity, but from the outset you put people into your cabinet that it has now subsequently emerged fell short of those standards. So then there's a question about whether the sort of scent of scandal is following Rishi Sunak around. And I think the big question really, Mark, and the one that isn't answerable right now, is whether or not this damages the Prime Minister or doesn't. I think what is fair to say is that for the right-wing press and his supporters, sort of framing this as an attack against a, intransient civil service will appeal to some Conservative voters and backers, and it will give a narrative for some of the press. But you could also argue that for his political opponents, this gives them a line of attack, that Rishi Sunak says one thing, he doesn't mean it, he's not strong, he doesn't sack them, he allows them to resign, and it's the same old Tories, to quote Sir Keir Starmer today. And I think that going up to the local elections, what Rishi Sunak has tried really hard to do since the beginning of the year is to get on with the job and try and act on small boats and try and act on waiting lists and, trying to push through reform of the economy. And what this takes him back to is the place he didn't want to be, which is the issue of scandal, of infighting, of party politics rather than getting on with the business of government. And I think the question is in the local elections, how bad will it be for the Conservatives and will that weaken Mr Sunak? I don't think this is necessarily a fatal blow for him, but it's uncomfortable to have to lose your Deputy Prime Minister around bullying, not allegations, 2 complaints upheld, when you promised as a Prime Minister to do politics differently.
Yeah, and just finally, Dominic Raab, is this political career done, do you think? Or
well, I think
because he survived the Afghanistan issue when he stayed on holiday during the when the Taliban took over. Does he come back from this?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to say about Dominic Raab. The first is, that he is clearly not going to just let this go and go quietly. And one civil servant that used to work with him said rather wryly to me today, when I said, what do you think about his response? They said, well, he's the boxer and he's come out swinging for us. We've just got to get on with the job. So I think that there's a sense that he's going to fight this and fight his corner, to the dismay, actually, of the civil service. And I think if that continues to bubble along and it all get exacerbated, that doesn't necessarily help the Prime Minister. The other thing I would say about Dominic Raab is he is in a pretty marginal seat in Esher, and there will be questions about, you know, he's now out of government, you know, and he looks at the next election, does he think he can hold on? The third thing I'd say about this, Mark, is when people fall on their swords and have a period on the back benches, it's not unknown that a Prime Minister who is loyal to that person tries to bring them back. So I wouldn't write him off quite yet. You can see that there is still affection and respect between these two men, despite all of this mess. I think for Rishi Sunak, he will be hoping that there's no more scandal in terms of the conduct of his ministers and those in his cabinet.
OK, Beth, thank you very much.